bit. And I love when someone gives me a topic and Greg said, would you talk about the daylily? And I don't think you can find a more perfect perennial. And we're going to go through and I'm going to tell you why I think this is the most perfect perennial in the world. We do have some events coming up in the daylily world. And at the very end, I'm going to talk to you about some different resources for some of the American Daylily Society that's actually coming up. But if you've got questions and you don't want to forget them, just put them in the chat box. And that way I'll catch them at the very end and we'll go through it. I don't remember every picture name that I have on this presentation. You're going to see a large number of daylily pictures. And I probably will try to remember most of them. A lot of them I take around at various gardens that I visit, basically east of the Mississippi. I've been to quite a few various gardens around. So, but we're going to start off. I'm going to talk about, I had a baby last year, pre-COVID, the month before COVID. And I'm trying to raise my daughter to be a daylily person also. The American Daylily Society has a fantastic magazine. And this is my best friend, Jason Reeves, who's the curator of the UT Gardens in Jackson. And he was fixing to put her to bed. He comes to my house quite a bit and helps me garden. And we were reading to her the Daylily Journal, which is a great magazine. But she also helps me when it's time to divide a few things and start labeling. So I'm trying to encourage the next generation. We've got to start these kids off young. Now, last year, pre-COVID, everybody was stuck at home. And I know I've talked to other agents about this. A lot of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s just discovered gardening last year. So a lot of the questions that I was actually getting from people were people who have never planted a tomato in their life, and they'll be 60 years old. And they just had some basic questions that I took for granted because I had a garden growing up. So I think we got to go ahead and start encouraging the next generation of these gardeners. So we're going to start off with a test. And now you can answer these mentally, but I'm going to go through these answers whenever I go through these questions, and you'll see some of the answers throughout the presentation. This is simple. True or false, are daylilies considered lilies? Number 2, there are only 5,000 hybrid daylilies available today. Number 3, daylilies are edible. And number 4, daylilies are native to Asia. So we're going to answer some of these as we go through it, but go ahead in your mind, think, what are the answers to these? We're all familiar with the original daylily that's found in ditches all across the Southeast. Hemberocalis fulva. We call it the tawny daylily, or another good name for it is the ditch lily. It's actually in the daylily family. This was the first daylily that was actually brought over by colonists, and they kind of spread it all across the U.S. because they would plant at their homesteads, they would plant near their outhouses. But the one thing that they would also do with it is the buds were edible. So they would actually cook these flower buds before they popped open, like you see in the background here, in a buttery sauce and eat them. So daylilies are edible. So they weren't just a pretty crop to actually have. The colonists, when they were bringing things from other countries, when they were moving from home to home to home, they brought things that they thought were important to them, and the daylily was one of those things that was important to them. Now, this daylily can be a runner in the garden. If you plant one ditch lily in a part of a garden, it will slowly creep through because this thing has roots that just run underground. So sometimes when we plant this old daylily, we regret it because it will slowly take over the entire bed. But I have some around some trees and out in pastures and in fence rows and things, and that's a perfect spot for this older daylily, this older ditch lily. I don't want it near a lot of my hybrids. They don't run. This one runs. So the first reason why I like daylilies so much is they're perennial. And if you ever hear a gardener say, well, I just can't grow daylilies, well, then they need to find a new hobby completely. There's no reason why anybody shouldn't be able to grow daylilies unless you just have no sun whatsoever. They seem to thrive on neglect. So there is a commercial daylily operation that's having some issues with some soil and And I honestly think they just amended the soil so much. They went through this giant long list of everything that they added to their soil. And I thought, I do none of those things. I assume the Cumberland Plateau has as much clay as we've got in Wilson County. I just dig a hole and I throw it in the ground. And if it lives, I'm happy, which 99% of the daylilies do. They just seem to thrive on neglect. So why are they called daylily? The Latin name is hemerocallis, which is actually Greek for beauty and day. They are not really used for a cut flower because the flower that we see open today will be gone tomorrow. And we don't really realize that because there's so many buds that are actually on the flower, on the scape. And we'll talk about the main parts of a daylily in just a second. So each scape will have 25 or 30 flowers. We don't realize that they're dropping one and then a new one's coming up. But each flower only lasts 24 hours. It's low maintenance. Really, the only requirement that they need is full sun. Now, I have some at my house. It's in some shade. Now, they grow in shade. Do they flower to their full potential? No, they do not, because they need full shade or full sun, excuse me. I have some just too close to my house and they don't get enough sun, but they still grow well. I think they would get more flower buds if I planted them in sun. Now, daylilies are not in the lily family. The true lily family is called Liliaceae, which are true bulbous lilies. Daylilies are not in that family. Daylilies are not a lily. They are closer related to red hot pokers and aloe. They are in the family called Asphodelaceae, which for the most part, if you think about how a red hot poker grows, it grows up from a bunch of spiky leaves. That's kind of what a daylily looks like. Same thing for aloe. It kind of has one main crown and it grows leaves from that main crown. So daylilies are closer related to red hot pokers than they are lilies. Oh, so that was one of the true false questions. We have operations all across the US, Canada, Europe that are growing and specializing in daylilies. So this is one of my favorite places to go visit. And from my house, I live in Lebanon. It's about 5 hours and I make it in a day. I try to leave about 4. I get there about 10 by the time I stop for breakfast and the time change. And I go visit this place outside of Asheville, North Carolina called Blue Ridge Daylilies. If you have the opportunity to go in the next 2 or 3 weeks, they're at peak bloom right now. Between now and maybe the 2nd or 3rd week of July, 90% of them will be bloom. Get a van load of people, go to this place. It is unreal how many acres they actually have. It's owned by Bob Selman and Eric Simpson. And this is actually half of the garden that they're actually seeing. And when I went 2 years ago, it was pouring the rain. And it was still unreal, the number of people that were standing in the rain looking at these daylilies. Here's another picture looking down the other way. Now, they are hybridizers, so they actually breed their own plants. So a lot of them are for sale, but when you get to certain parts, they'll say, well, these are our seedlings. We're evaluating these. They're not going to be for sale for 6 more years or something like that. But it is unreal. Do yourself a favor and go rent a van and then take a busload of people and go. But daylilies come pretty much in every shape and size that you see. And I'm going to show you some extremely tall ones and I'm going to show you some really small ones. We have them ranging in size from 1 inch all the way. We have some that are almost 15 or 16 inches wide now if you actually stretch them out. These are some of my favorite ones. The one on the left is called Mayor of Munchkinland. It's a little bitty guy. And the one on the right is called Fang-tastic. Has all those teeth around the edges. Now, daylilies, you can pay anywhere from $5 to $500 for a daylily. I'm one of those weird people that goes to these auctions that they'll actually have these daylily auctions. And it's really unreal what some people have. Now, I work for the state. I'm poor. I am unable to buy some of these really fancy daylilies. But these are just some that I have in my garden right now. And I'll show you a lot more that I like in just a second. Now, in the true false questions, I said there are only 5,000 daylilies available today. That is false. There are around 80,000 available now. The issue is we have so many introduced new each year from hybridizers that within 5 or 6 years, if they were not strong performers, if they weren't stellar in the garden, they get lost over time. So a lot of the introductions that we had from some of the pioneer daylily hybridizers in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s have been lost because we've got a lot of new introductions that's just been a little bit better. But we have groups of people who will have gardens called historic daylily gardens where they are focusing on a lot of these heirloom daylilies. Daylilies, like I said earlier, were grown for their herbal properties. They are edible for many years. The one name that you will see over and over again is a guy named Dr. Arlo B. Stout. He became interested in hemerocallis in the early 1900s. So he got all the various species of daylilies he can find. So we have that hemerocallis fulva. That's probably the most common one. We have one called hemerocallis citrina, and we have a bunch of other species. We have Korean species. We have a lot of Asian species of daylilies, which is where most of them originated from. So he collected all the different ones he can find, and he made crosses. He started beginning hybridizing a lot of these daylilies. Excuse me. And he made around 50,000 crosses. So each cross will yield anywhere from 5 to 15 seeds. If you just do the math, he made 50,000 crosses, and each cross yielded, we'll say, 10 seeds on average. That is a lot of daylily seeds, and he kept very meticulous records on, it was this one crossed with this one, and here's the seedlings. And he would select the best ones and introduce them into market. So you'll see some daylilies with this award called the Stout Medal. So the American Hemerocallis Society, they're starting to transition their name to the American Daylily Society, awards one daylily each year the Stout Medal. Now it's because it's, it is the stoutest daylily, but it was named in honor of Dr. Arlo B. Stout. So each year you can go through, just Google Stout Medal winner daylilies, and that'll be the one daylily that was grown best all across our continent, because a lot of daylily hybridizers are in Canada now. So that's how hardy they are, zone 4 hardy. So just Google that list. If you're looking for just 5 or 10 stellar daylilies to add to your garden, look for the Stout Medal winners. The first hybrid that he introduced to the world was a little yellow one with a black eye called Mikado. And I'm almost positive it's still available at some places today, because we have a lot of people who like just the history of some of these things. And in 1946, the AHS was formed, which is the American Daylily Society, or the American Hemerocallis Society. Now, daylilies come in every color except for a true white and a true blue. All right. I took these two pictures in my garden in the past week. We have some daylily hybridizers who were skirting getting blue and skirting getting white. Now, all the whites that we've seen in the past of just white daylilies are a faint yellow. And as the sun kind of hits them for a few hours, they bleach out. So that's why in the afternoon they look just white. When they first open, they're a faint yellow if you actually hold up some color charts to them. But here's two that's bloomed at my house, and these were from other people that I've purchased over the past few years. I think in the future we will have blue, and some of these pictures are going to reflect that. But these are a couple of introductions that I really like in my garden. The one on the right is called Quasar Cutie, and the one on the left with the little bitty pattern inside the eye is called Banishing the Dark. So to contrast, Banishing the Dark on the left was bred by a Florida hybridizer, so zone probably 9. The one on the right was bred by a lady in zone 4. Her name was Kathleen Nordstrom, and she breeds a lot of daylilies, and I think their daylilies business is called Northern Lights Daylilies. But zone 4 to 9 and everywhere in between, you can grow daylilies. They come pretty much in every shape and size that you can find. And it's pretty unreal whenever you visit some of these daylily operations, the phenomenal number of hybrids that we have available. And I was talking about hybridizing. Why we have so many out is because they're so easy to actually hybridize. So I mentioned a minute ago that daylilies are not daylilies, or not in the lily family. They're actually in the family called Asphodelaceae. How do you tell the difference between a daylily and a true lily? A true lily actually comes from a bulb and it has leaves on its stalk. A daylily comes from, all the leaves come from one specific point at the ground called a crown. So sometimes a daylily will have a little new plant pop up on the stem or the scape. But for the most part, that's the easiest way to tell whether you have a daylily or a true lily, whether it has a bulb or a mass of roots called a crown, and how are the leaves growing. If the leaves are on the stems, then it's more than likely a true lily. You have four main parts on a daylily. The roots, which emerge from the crown. The crown is the daylily stem, basically, that we'll see at the base of the ground. The leaves are long, slender, and they look just like grass. And you'll hear me talk off and on here in the next few minutes about scapes. A scape is actually the flower stalk. That's leafless, that will have all of the buds that come on top of it. When we're talking about the sheer number of daylilies available, I hit on it a minute ago that we have about 80,000 daylilies. They come in every shape and size. And when I'm talking about shapes, you'll have some that are really skinny petals. You'll have some that are fat and they're actually doubled, and you'll have some with such heavy ruffling, they have a hard time actually opening. So when we look at the sheer number of daylily forms, we have basically these ones: single, double, spider, unusual form, which we call UF, polymerous, and multiform. And I think I've got pictures of all of these. Now, y'all have a daylily hybridizer in crossful. The picture right there was one that I got from Linda Hassler a few years ago, and it's called She Laughed. And it is a huge flower. She laughed. All right, so starting off, daylilies have only 3 petals and 3 sepals for the single flowers. Now, we're going to hit doubles in just a second. So when we're talking about these, the petals are on top of the sepals. Now, what's the function of a petal? A function of the petal is to show pollinators where the goodies are. A sepal is actually the protective covering that protects the flower while it's a bud. So whenever the flower opens up, the petals are what we're actually going to be seeing that are colorful, they're larger, and the sepals are actually behind those. So when we're looking at this flower right here, you can see the 3 petals on top of the 3 sepals. There's the sepal, and then there is the petal. Single forms are probably my favorite daylilies. I'm not a fan of some of the other ones because I think I look at the sheer number of colors that they're actually coming in right now, and it is absolutely stunning what people are actually doing. But if you look at, here's a couple other single forms that I've liked, but some of them really pack a punch. This is called Blue Ridge Lucky Charm. This was one clump, and I bet it had 250,000 flowers on it. It was one great plant. I saw this at Blue Ridge, and I left with it because I absolutely love, I don't know what color you would actually call that, an off-color orange, but I love that eye. I love the edge on the entire plant. But I couldn't get over how the entire plant looked. And I think that's why I enjoy going to daylily gardens, because I can see a picture of one flower and think, oh, that's gorgeous. I want to see what the rest of it looks like. Is it a good garden performer? Is it tall? Is it short? Do the flowers kind of look muddy? Did they just take one good picture on one good day? I want to go look at them in person before I actually buy them, especially if I'm going to spend over $10 or $12 on one. Doubles are extremely popular. They have extra petals inside the middle of the already layer of petals. And it depends on who you're talking to and what you actually call those petals. So you can actually see it in the background. We still have the sepals. The next layer, we have the petals, and then we have the extra petals that's in the middle. I hear people say, well, all that extra fluff, but that's actually just petals in there. There's a couple of other that are actually called doubles. The one on the left is called Bonnebrae Sharky because it's got those teeth. The one on the right is called Ted's Tea Time, and it was bred by a guy, a golfer. It was bred by a guy who in Kentucky, actually, he had a friend, I guess, who was a golfer. A few more doubles. The one on the right is a great red double called Double Blue Blood. And the one on the left, it's hard to tell, but it's not a large flower. It may only be 3.5, 4 inches, but it's called Raspberry Ripple Cupcake. This was a seedling I had a few years ago, and I thought, this is fantastic. I'm going to be a millionaire. It never doubled again. The first year, it was just great, and it became an ugly flower after that. So we eventually got rid of it. Spiders are the ones that sometimes will curl so much, it's hard to tell how big the petals actually are. So on some of these spiders, you can stretch them out to 15 or 16 inches long. Normally, they'll have a length to width ratio of the petal of 4:1. So for every 4 inches that the petal is long, it can only be 1 inch wide. So if the petal is 8 inches long, the petal can only be 2 inches wide. That's the restrictions on calling something an actual spider. This one was called Chesapeake Crab Legs, and then this one's called Bottle Rocket. Bottle Rocket had a great eye, and it's kind of like a chevron type eye inside of it. Now, I worked at a nursery in Cookeville when I went to Tech 15 years ago called Burgess Falls, and one of the owners there still does. He's a Daylily hybridizer, but this is actually taken in his hybridizing greenhouse. But you can see where he's made all these white tags on the flowers. So normally he would take the pollen from one, cross it, and then he would write a little white tag and wrap it around that flower. So whenever it falls off the next day, he knows what pollen was actually on that flower. And we'll talk more about hybridizing in just a second. And I don't have any pictures of these, but we have other forms called UFs, and they'll be cristated where the petals will actually be pinched. You'll have cascading where they actually curl, and we'll have spatulate where it kind of widens out at the base. It kind of looks like a giant spoon. But keep in mind, if you're trying to add daylilies to your garden, I don't think it'll be hard to find something that will fit your taste. And these are some that I've had. That one on the left is called Fortune Cookie Factory, and that was one that my wife bought a few years ago. And the one on the right is called So It Begins. And I still have both of these, and I think they're great. The problem this year, I don't know if y'all are like us, it's rained every morning that I've gotten up. So I like to hybridize too, but rain ruins pollen. We have a really big debate in daylilies. You have two main ploides, chromosomal counts on these daylilies. You can't cross them to each other and make a new daylily. So you have a tetraploid and then you have a diploid. So generally a tetraploid has 44 chromosomes. A diploid has 22 chromosomes. They don't cross. It would be like crossing a dog and a cat. So people who are hybridizers, they generally just focus on tetraploids, and then those who are focusing on diploids generally just have diploids. Now I have a little bit of both. The problem is trying to keep straight which one is a tetraploid, which one is a diploid. And I'll hit on a couple other things in just a second. But generally a tetraploid will have larger flowers. The colors seem to be more intense. Scapes seem to be sturdier. The flower substance is just thicker. It just looks like a thicker plant. It looks like a bigger plant. Now, how did we get tetraploids? About 50 years ago, we've discovered that you can change chromosomal counts to make them mutate with a couple of chemicals. One of them is called colchicine, and they were actually trying to make tetraploid daylilies, make them thicker and bigger, and that's how it came about. Now we have tetraploid hostas, and we have other plants that they're actually trying to mutate a little bit to make thicker scapes and healthier looking plants. Diploids are great also. And I have both. And if you're looking at a plant right now, you can't look at one and say that's a dip, that's a tet. Some of them I just know because I feel like some of the really textured ones with a lot of different colors are going to be tets, but that's not the case anymore. Diploids have exquisite flower form, grace colored. Generally, a good pink is always a dip. Spiders and doubles are generally dips. I'm gonna say dip for diploid. Many diploids have been converted to tetraploid to try to change the line. So if I have a really good pink daylily, I can treat it with colchicine, make it a tetraploid, and use some of those pink ones in some of my hybridizing lines. But I want you to keep in mind, we didn't have tetraploids up until about 40 or 50 years ago. For the first 50 years, it was all diploids. So today, on the daylily market, there are more diploids than tetraploids. Look at the two most popular ones that we have. Stella d'Oro, diploid. Happy Returns, diploid, which are used by landscapers over and over and over again. But just looking at daylilies, you can't tell what it really is without kind of going back into maybe where you got it from, or we have a daylily database that will tell you. This was a garden somewhere in Kentucky. But if I just walk through that garden, I can't point to one and say that's a diploid or that's a tetraploid unless I really, really know what I'm talking about. And I had this little guy bloom earlier this week. That's called Sweet As Can Be. And I can't tell you whether it's a dip or a tet. I don't know right offhand. You just can't tell. So the issue is if I'm hybridizing, I have got to know whether it's a dip or a tet. Because if I take this Sweet As Can Be pollen and spread it all over the place, all over my tetraploids, and then I find out that it's a diploid, I have wasted my time. We have three main branches of foliage. You'll see some that are dormant, evergreen, and semi-evergreen. In Tennessee, we pretty much can grow both. Evergreen daylilies need to be grown usually in Florida because they will usually hold their leaves above ground throughout the wintertime and kind of store up energy. Dormant daylilies need to be grown further north where they have a substantial amount of snow and ice. An evergreen daylily will try to hold those leaves up 10, 12 inches of snow on top of it, and it will kill it. So we're in Tennessee. We're right kind of in the middle of Canada and Florida. You can grow both. So keep that in mind. So if you're buying daylilies and you say, oh, this one says evergreen, that's okay. And you say, oh, this one says dormant, that's okay. Do both. See which ones you like better. Now, daylilies come in any size that you want. You can get them as tall as probably 70 inches now, and as short as 15 inches tall. But I'm going to show you some. Now, this one, we have a couple of really big ones on the market now. One of them is called Notify Ground Crew, and I think this one was Sears Tower. They're both extremely tall ones. One that I have blooming in my house right now is called Eos at Dawn. You can see all my other little daylilies in the front of this one. They're all about 2 feet tall. This one, this is my friend Jason again. He was helping me landscape. 6 feet tall. Killer scapes. It just has a great color. And seemed like I took this picture this morning. I try to take daylily pictures every morning, especially now I'm trying to beat the rain. But we have a lot of daylilies on the market that have a lot of great landscape potential. Please go look at what they look like in some of these gardens as opposed to just seeing one picture of one and thinking, oh, that's going to be a great plant for the garden. It may have one pretty day and the rest of the year it may just be terrible. So the one on the left was called Plum Cupcake, and the one on the right was called Toy Trumpets. The one on the right looks like a Stella d'Oro or a Happy Returns on steroids. It stood about 4 feet tall and had 2,000 flowers on it. This was in a garden in Kentucky. It was absolutely killer. And this was introduced in the early 80s. Because of this one garden, after people saw this, it's really hard to find now. You can't find it for sale. And I want this one. And I think I'm going to try to. There's a couple places finally starting to get it. But after we all toured this one garden, all the places wanted this one plant because they saw that it's a great landscape plant. Please don't buy daylilies judged upon one picture. Do daylilies have bugs? Yeah. Do they have diseases? Yeah. I know that's not exactly what you wanted to hear. We have a few pests that bother daylilies: aphids, spider mites, leaf miners, slugs. Is there any real solution to all these? There are insecticidal soaps and things. Sometimes you just live with it. I don't spray anything on my daylilies because I'm not anti-pesticide. I'm lazy and I'm cheap. So I do have leaf miner damage on some daylilies, but that just bothers the leaves. It doesn't actually bother the flowers. Sometimes I'll get aphids all over the scapes. I've never had aphids kill a daylily. Luckily, I've never had spider mites on my daylilies, but I do have some slugs that are actually chewed up, and there's really no set solution for slugs. And you can Google 40 different ways on the internet, and all of them are going to say that they're right. But how do you tell what an aphid is? I took these pictures with my iPhone through a microscope. Aphids are sucking insects. The one way you can tell an aphid from any other small bug is they'll have two tubes coming from their back. You can see on the red one there and on the green one on the right, they've got these two little tubes that just hang off their back. What's the problem with aphids? They suck, the stem and the things dry. But I've never had one kill one. But on other plants, if you have a really high aphid infestation, they can really wipe out something. So sometimes if I have tomato issues or something, and I have a ton of aphids, it may be best to kind of stay on top of them. Why? Aphids have live birth. They don't lay eggs. An aphid can have 6 or 7 babies a day. So, all right, and they become sexually active within just a few days. If you kind of don't stay on top of them and they're on your tomatoes, they get out of hand extremely fast. We do have one main daylily disease. Luckily, it does not overwinter in Tennessee. If I was in Florida, where I have an extremely mild winter, this fungus called Puccini hemerocalidus will actually overwinter. And when I lived in Cumberland County, I had daylily rust. So I bought some daylilies, probably from Florida. They shipped up here. They had the rust on them, and it slowly wiped out my bed, but didn't kill them. It just affects the leaves. So that winter, I did hit them with a fungicide to try to knock it back some. So that winter, I went through, gathered up all the leaves, burned them. Okay. Our winters in Tennessee are harsh enough that's actually killing rust. So if you get rust, please don't hit panic mode and spray a bunch of things, because it's not going to come back unless you're moving the daylilies into a greenhouse where it's mild and they're not getting frosted on. But how do you tell daylily rust from other diseases? So leaf streak happens in the springtime. If we have a fluctuation in temperatures, which is every spring in Tennessee, we'll go 30 degrees and then we'll hit 60 degrees, and then we'll hit 15 degrees. That's hard on some plants. We'll get leaf streaks, so we'll actually get some funguses sometimes on the leaves. It won't kill it. How do you tell rust from leaf streak? Rust will actually rub off on your hand. So if I had a leaf and it's got rust, I just touch it and I'll have rust on my hands, just like touching a rusty piece of metal. So going on why we have so many hybrids available today. These two daylilies are great plants. So the one on the left is called the Carpenter's Heart, and the one on the right is called Goody Goody Gumdrop. So how do you make a new one? You take the pollen from one and you put it on the pistil of another one. Okay, so the pistil is a collective term for the female part of the flower. So at the top is the stigma, the long tube is called the style, and the ovary is connected at the bottom. So the top of the female part of the flower is sticky. Why is it sticky? Because it wants to collect pollen. So what am I going to do? I am going to, we'll say the one on the right, goody goody gumdrop. I'm going to take some of that pollen, which is called the stamen. I'm going to take the pollen and actually touch it to the pistil. That's my grubby hands right there in my garden. You can see plenty of weeds in the background. I have weeds in my garden. I know that's unlike all of you. So that's how you actually get a new one. So how do I keep track of these crosses? I have these plastic tags. So I take the pollen from one, goody goody gumdrop, touch it to that one, and I write a plastic tag. And so that plastic tag says egg, and that was a plant called eggplant escapade or something like that I had in my garden. I can't remember. And I wrapped that little white tag around it, and if it actually took, it will make a little walnut, and that's where the seeds are. So those will actually swell up within 3-4 weeks, and it will get bigger. The flower will soon fall off. And how do I know when that's actually ripe? It will start to turn a little brown, and the top will just barely crack open. So what's the next step? So I know this seed is actually the carpenter's heart crossed with goody goody gumdrop. I will make a little plastic label, get a little Ziploc bag, and put those seeds. I'll let those seeds dry for a day somewhere on my kitchen counter, and then put them in a Ziploc bag, and then put them in the refrigerator until I want to plant them in pots inside, which is generally in the winter time. Okay. Why do you do that? Most perennial plants do better when they go through a period of cold. So it's hard to keep some plants alive completely all year long. They just need a period of rest, which is a period of cold, which is winter time. So when you put those seeds in the refrigerator, you mimic winter, and they just seem to do better. Then I'll plant them, in cups, or some people will plant them directly outside in pots and just leave them, because daylily seeds are easy to actually germinate. The one hiccup is it is a time game. So if I made this seed last week, I collected my seeds, I'm going to plant them this winter, I probably won't have flowers until 2023. It takes about 2 years to actually see flowers. So I have a few this year that I got from some friends 3 years ago that didn't bloom last year. This is year number 4. They should bloom this year. I'm extremely excited. I've waited 3 or 4 years for these silly things to actually bloom. So hybridizing seems extremely easy, but it does take time. So I buy seeds sometimes from a few places online. We have daylily auctions on Facebook. We have them on all these different social media sites. We also got an auction that's just daylily.com, which is they just call it the daylily auction. I have a few people that I buy seeds from that I really trust. Now, I don't trust everything online at all. You can find people selling blue hosta seeds, and you can find people selling blue daylily seeds. Don't trust any of that. I'm really picky who I buy from. So I buy seeds from generally one guy up north. So I bought these seeds, and I had them 4 years ago. And I think the cross was, one of them was called Pinewood Lily Pad, and the other one was called Ninja Turtle. I guess you could see why one was called Ninja Turtle. And I liked the cross. He said, I've got 5 seeds up for auction, so I bought them. I didn't pay a whole lot for them. Well, I waited 2 years for them to bloom. Here were 3 of the seedlings. I had one that had a little bit of purple on the outside edges. I had one that had a little bit of that was completely green. And then I had one that had a lot of purple on the outside edges. So why do people make so many crosses of the same one? If I plant 100 seeds of the same cross, you could potentially get 100 different looking flowers. And I think that's what's great about it, is it's a fun game. You have no clue what you're going to get. Now, I know that these came from this cross. Look at that big green throat. Look at that big green eye. But the one on the far right was from the same seed pod, did not have that big green throat I was looking for. And these have actually bloomed again. They started blooming again last week, and I'm watching them whether I want to actually introduce them or not. But I think they turned out really cool looking. But keep in mind, we have so many daylilies. And if you have a devotion to red daylilies, there are plenty of good red hybridizers that you can actually find. If you're looking for places to start, let me encourage you to go to a website called Daylily Diary. It's all the daylily hybridizers in the US, Canada, and Europe. You can go through there and search for people who were just in Region 10, which is Tennessee and Kentucky. And you can go through and you can go visit all these gardens. Most of these gardens are open to the general public, but it will say, hey, give us a heads up if you want to come through. That way they know that they're around. But if you have an affinity toward eyed daylilies or spider daylilies or some of these with these really fancy edges, we've got hybridizers focusing on all of these things. This one was that fantastic again. The one on the left here is called Behold the Lamb. The one on the right had speckles on the petals and this one was called Sprinkled with Paprika. Now I know Linda Hassler in Crossville has that one, and I love eyed daylilies, so you're going to see a lot of mine in the next few slides that are just big old fat eyes on them. I love them. We do have people who are focusing on daylilies that look like someone took a paintbrush and splattered them. So the one on the left is called Pink Stripes, and the one on the right was called Harmonic Hues. Those striped daylilies, we have a lot of new ones coming out every year. If you're like, I'd love to have some of those. Now, Pink Stripes is relatively cheap now. Some of the new ones will start at $250, $300, which is not a good price for me. So I have to wait 10 years before they actually come out. Now, why are some of them so high? People want them for the pollen. So if someone saw a new one that's got broken patterns all over the petals and they pay $500 for it, they 99% of the time want it to hybridize with. They want to cross it to some of the ones that they have. So that's why some of them are so expensive. Some of them are just hybridizing type plants. Love those eyes. Here's a few more with a bunch of those eyes. But I love a lot of these that are larger flowers. This one was called Viva Pinata because I love the color contrast on this one. Now, all these that I've shown, this is just a small fraction of what you can actually get today. If you look at all these and you thought every one of those was ugly that Lucas showed today, there are plenty of other ones that you can find. Just go visit some local gardens. One of my favorite things to do, and a lot of them didn't happen last year, is go on daylily tours. So if you get on the website, daylilies.org, which is the American Hemerocallis Society, the American Daylily Society, they have bus tours of local gardens. And this one, I think this one was on Louisville, Kentucky a couple of years ago. Now, last year, all of them were canceled. Some of them are slowly starting to vamp back up again this year. So if you are one who loves garden tours, go to the Daylilies website, the American Hemerocallis Society, and look for those garden tours that's coming up. Normally, it's not a lot of money. You pay $125, and that's your tours for 2 or 3 days and your meals. That doesn't include your hotel, but that's normally your tours for 2 or 3 days and your food. You can't beat that. And you get to look at gardens for 3 or 4 days in a row. And here's some of my friends on a bus. So I was a bus captain on a tour a couple of years ago. Bunch of rough people on that bus, but we had a great time. Get on that website, the American Daylily Society, and actually look at their resources. So if you get on this website and you're trying to find new daylilies, click on daylilies right there, and you can actually search for gardens that are close to you. You can search for hybridizers that are close to you, and it'll actually have a ton of resources of people that will just ship daylilies to you. But that's the main hub of actually trying to find all the information for the daylilies. When you buy daylilies in, 99% of the time, they're going to be bare root, and they will do just fine. So these were some that we actually got in the past couple of years. That's my daughter with her first box of daylilies. So my wife one night bought a few from a hybridizer in North Carolina from Blue Ridge, and I said, let me get a picture with you and my daughter so I can say I'm buying these plants for my daughter as opposed to me, because I don't want people to think I'm being selfish. They're not my flowers anymore. They're my daughter's flowers. And everybody noted on my daughter's hairdo. That was how it was for the first year of her life. It just, you couldn't get her hair to sit down. All right. Join the American Daylily Society. It has a great magazine. A lot of gardening magazines, we've just, there's not many out there anymore. I think a lot of stuff has been moved to virtual formats, and we've got a lot of information from Facebook. I like just a plain magazine I can sit on my porch. This is a quarterly magazine that comes 4 times a year, and it is a great daylily magazine focusing on hybridizers and a lot of local gardens. We have a lot of local farms in Middle Tennessee, and East Tennessee has quite a few. Region 10 is our region on the American Daylily Society, which is Kentucky and Tennessee. A lot of those pictures that I'm showing are from a place called Blue Ridge in North Carolina, which is just across the state line. If you've never been to Oaks, which is near Knoxville, great mail order outfit who will send great plants. I've bought plenty of daylilies from Oaks. Hey, get involved. If you're not going to jump head first into the daylily world, you can still go to these garden tours. Now, all these gardens don't just have daylilies. They have a lot of other things too. We'll see exquisite ponds, and we'll see hosta gardens, and we'll see true lily beds, and go visit all these things. During a normal year, around February, Region 10, Tennessee and Kentucky will have one daylily meeting that's normally a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday called Midwinter Symposium. And it was canceled the past couple of years. It was canceled last year. It was canceled this year. No, it happened last year because it was February before the world started shutting down. But it was canceled this year, but it's already in the works for next year. I love going to some of these daylily symposiums because you go, you listen to the daylily hybridizers, and you see some of the new things that they're coming out with. Well, Greg, that is it for me.